Welcome back to Green Mountain Mornings here on WINQ AM Brattleboro. I'm your host, Olga Peters, and I have in the studio with me Melanie Winters from The Reformer. Welcome, Melanie.
Thank you.
And quickly, before I forget, we have two sponsors for this hour. The first is Brattleboro Subaru, where their customer is their number one priority. They have a knowledgeable sales staff, a vast selection, and lowest prices available. You can visit them online at brattleborosubaru.com or stop in and see them at 1234 Putney Road in Brattleboro. The second sponsor is Brattleboro Savings and Loan, and they are sponsoring the broadcast of Green Mountain Mornings tonight, and that will be on BCTV later this evening. So thank you, BCTV, for coming into the studio today. Hey, Melanie.
Hello.
Hello again. There is some breaking news happening at the Reformer right now regarding the resignation of one of the police officers. Tell me a little bit about
Penny
that.
Witherby filed a lawsuit against the police department, certain high-ranking officers, the town of Brattleboro, and the town manager, and I believe the assistant town manager is named in that, alleging sexual discrimination and harassment in the workforce, in the workplace. And she just found out yesterday she submitted her letter of resignation. Just based on, since filing the lawsuit, she just feels that the work environment has become even more hostile to her, and she just doesn't feel she can continue, which is it's unfortunate. I mean, I don't know how the case will play out in court. You know, that's up for the courts to decide.
Yes,
you know,
yes.
I'm not going to try this in the public sphere here, but yeah, I mean, I kind of saw that coming because once you file a lawsuit, you know, whatever harassment you may have been feeling or experiencing, it's going to be amplified because now you're the enemy,
Right.
according to those who you filed the lawsuit against. So it wasn't a surprise. I was not surprised to hear this, but.
Have you covered other similar cases in other communities as an editor or reporter?
Actually, this is the first that I've dealt with, you know, firsthand in the newspaper. I mean, I read about other situations and you know the whole hashtag Me Too movement and so forth, and I know it exists. I have worked in industries where sexual innuendo was prevalent. Before I came to the Reformer, I worked for a trade magazine that covered the boating and woodworking industry. And you want to talk about male dominance.
Good point.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I never experienced sexual harassment myself, but the innuendo, and it just makes you feel uncomfortable. Certain words that are used and are not appropriate makes you feel uncomfortable. So I've experienced that from that perspective. But this is the first time that I've covered it in a newspaper that I worked for.
And what's that like, kind of being on the other side of the desk from a story?
Well, you
like
have
this?
you have to maintain a certain objectivity. I mean, I want to champion women's rights, but I am a journalist, and we have to tell both sides of the story. And like I said, this issue has to play out in court.
Yeah. Well, Melanie, thank you for that insight. And Melanie and I are going to go to break. We shall return momentarily, so don't touch that dial. We are back, and this is Green Mountain Mornings on 100.3 FM, AM 1490, 20 minutes past the top of the hour. I'm your host, Olga Peters, and we almost missed the cue because we were all talking about, Melanie and I and Brian from BCTV, we're all talking about our days in sports, and Melanie was a front runner of one of the few girls to play baseball.
It was shortly after Title IX passed, yeah, and my mother went to sign me up, and she got a snarky comment. Well, the Constitution says we got to let her play, so I guess we got to let her play. So I played.
So you played all the way through high school.
All the way through high school. Yeah.
The staying power. That was probably your best victory.
Yes.
Right there. I was saying I didn't really play a lot of competitive sports because they're not my favorite thing to do. But in high school, when I was required to do that, because we all had to take a PE and a sports, I came from such a small school that we didn't have enough for boys teams and girls teams. So everything was co-ed. And we'd show up to these other schools where we were playing the boys team. and all the boys would be like, ew, there's girls. We don't want to play against girls.
Fortunately, that attitude has changed.
I really hope so.
For the most part.
For the most part. Um, Speaking of youth, tell me, the Reformer had a great piece on the Youth Conservation Corps, which I think a
Yes.
lot of people don't talk about that much anymore. I remember in my mom's day, it was huge, the Youth Conservation Corps, but I don't know that we really think about it so much anymore.
Not so much. But it is a great program, especially in this day and age where there are not a lot of jobs available to teens. Most of the jobs that are traditional entry into the workforce type jobs, grocery stores, fast food restaurants, those are being taken over by adults who never really recovered from the recession, or, were just getting anything they could to get by through the recession. And so, it's really too bad, because I think teens gain a lot of valuable experience, not just on the job itself, but just the practice of getting up, getting a schedule, and getting there on time, and learning how to interact with coworkers or with the public and so forth. Those kind of things you cannot teach in school, really.
This is so true.
So I think our youth are hurt by not having those opportunities. This Youth Conservation Corps is a great program, and not only does it teach them these life skills for preparing them for the workforce, but it also teaches them, I think, a better appreciation for our parks, our trail system, community service. A lot of the vandalism, let's face it, is done by youth, primarily teenagers, maybe people in their early 20s. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that they don't appreciate the work that goes into what they're vandalizing.
That's a really, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, if they're blazing these trails, if they're picking up the trash, other people's trash, they learn to appreciate, well, if people didn't do this in the first place, there wouldn't be so much picking up to do. I remember as a kid, the local park, where I played baseball, they would have the kids come down and volunteer and help pick things up or help clear a new area for a picnic area or a new ballpark or something like that. And for years afterward, I would go down to that park and, well, there's trash here. I got to pick this up. And it instills that sense of community.
Yeah.
That I think is invaluable.
Kind of a sense of ownership, as you were pointing to.
Yes.
And remind me, the Conservation Corps, it tends to operate in the summertime with youth, right?
Yes, which is perfect because they have time off from school, so they can work full time, full days, and they go out and they blaze trails. They pick up trash. They clean up picnic areas, and it's a great experience for them, and get some little pocket money, so they learn some finances, their own finances, and so forth.
Yep.
And I think it's a lot. It's hard work, but it seemed to me it'd be more fun than washing dishes or, punching a cash register key. You're getting out there and into it. That seems like, fun, educational, money, win.
It's experiential learning at its best.
There you go.
And that story is still up online at reformer.com if anyone wanted to check it out.
Teens hit pay dirt.
Nice. Thinking of other volunteer jobs where you're not getting a lot of pay, but someone is working because that's where their heart is. Talk to me a little bit about the volunteer parking enforcement officer in Bellows Falls.
Yeah, Cass Wright. I guess Bellows Falls has had an ongoing parking issue. They got rid of their parking meters, and they've been having a problem with people parking downtown. They're only supposed to be there for like an hour or two, but people have been parking there all day. And instead of going to long-term parking areas. And that creates a problem for the downtown businesses because they want the constant, flow.
Yeah.
They need constant traffic coming in and out of the downtown area. And if all the parking spaces are taken up, people are just going to drive by. Well, it's not worth the hassle.
Right.
So they've been having a problem there, and the police department is just overwhelmed. They can't. Parking for them is a low priority issue. It's not a low priority issue for the businesses, But for the police department that are handling drug crimes and domestic violence and so forth, this is a low priority. So it was kind of falling under the radar, pardon the pun.
Now go for it. We like puns here.
So I guess Cass Wright stepped up and volunteered for a 90-day period to be the parking enforcement officer. And basically what he's doing is he's just kind of making his rounds, and if he sees a car that's been there for more than 2 hours, he'll write a ticket. And I guess he's been getting some flack from the people he writes the tickets to, which,
I can see that happening.
yeah.
As someone who has received parking tickets, yes.
But well, it'd be interesting to see how this plays out, because as good as his intentions are, I don't know if this is something that can continue as a volunteer thing. I imagine that his goal is to show that if you have a parking enforcement officer, in the long run, it's more beneficial. Even if they have to pay that person,
it kind of pays for
the
itself.
return is
Yeah.
worth it. I think that's what his intent is to show, so that this issue doesn't, again, fall by the wayside and get ignored. So it'd be interesting to see what happens after 90 days if he's able to show, this is what we were able to bring in. And they make clear that it's not about revenue.
Right.
It's
Okay.
about freeing up the parking spaces for the downtown businesses so they can get customers in and out. But, as a side benefit, if you can get some extra money in or just make people aware of the issue, you get a $15 ticket, you're going to think twice next time about staying there a lot more than 2 hours. So it'd be interesting to see how this plays out.
Now, one concern I had about this piece is Cass is the husband of one of the trustees, the Bellows Falls trustees.
Yep, Deb Wright.
How are they navigating that? Because that seems to me like it could also be a conflict of
It
interest.
could be, and Deb was aware of that, and so she is abstaining from all voting on this issue because her husband is involved, which I think is appropriate.
Appropriate,
Yeah.
covers all bases.
Yes.
Well, Melanie and I are going to head to break, and then we will be talking about, the youth vote
Mm-hmm.
and the good news for the Brattleboro landfill.
Yes.
Lots of good stuff ahead. So stay tuned. Don't touch that dial, and we shall return. This is Green Mountain Mornings. Welcome back. You are listening on 100.3 FM AM 1490. I'm your host, Olga Peters. 37 minutes past the top of the hour. And welcome back, Melanie Winters.
Thank you.
So glad you're here. Tell me a little bit about, there's been some developments around the youth vote.
Yes, they are working on getting a petition. They actually have a deadline today. I can't remember whether it's 11 or noon to have the petitions filed in the town clerk's office. They are trying to give 16 and 17-year-olds the right to vote in local elections and also run on the school board, so they can serve on the school board. It's interesting the reaction that we've been getting on Facebook. Some people are like, really? They're too young, blah, blah, blah. But there's another side to this. For one thing, it'd be great to encourage more participation in local voting, because as much as we as journalists try to explain to people, the local vote actually matters more
Yeah, it does.
than the national one.
It really does.
Because these are the everyday things that affect your life, but the turnout is still abysmal in
Yeah.
local elections. And, I don't know what else we can say to people to get them to the polls. So let's encourage 16 and 17-year-olds. I mean, there is some concerns that at this age, kids are just parroting what their parents do or how they vote. I think that may be true on the national level. But in terms of local elections, I think because of the poor turnout and the poor participation, I don't think that's an issue, because I imagine there's a lot of parents who don't even know who's running.
Right.
So maybe the kids can get involved and get educated and educate the parents to get out and vote. And especially when it comes to school issues, I don't see anything wrong with letting a 16 or 17-year-old run for the school board and serve on the school board. These are the things, they're directly affected by the decisions that are made by this board.
This is true.
And I wouldn't advocate having the entire school board run by 16 and 17-year-olds. That would be
Probably end up with ice cream
chaotic.
sundaes
Yes, you're right.
every day for lunch. Yes.
Because obviously there are a lot of issues, complicated issues, state issues that may be beyond a 16 or 17-year-old, but they know what it's like to be at the school.
Yeah. That's a really important perspective,
Yeah.
too, I think, to bring to the board is, well, folks, here's your decision, but this is what it looks like on the ground level.
Mm-hmm.
That's really powerful.
Right. So I see nothing wrong with having one or two 16 or 17-year-olds serving on the school board, and it would foster community involvement in the voting process, in the town government, and we keep hearing that is going down, in the last decade or so. Community involvement, people serving on boards. It's generally older people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and they're getting older and they want to step down and let some new blood take over. And this was a way to foster more involvement on the local level, and I think that's a good thing.
Well, and also I understand people's concerns about having a young person on the board. At the same time, it would be one or two voices,
Mhm.
and the board is expected to work as a team.
Yes.
So I don't see how one person out of however many there, because it's a pretty big board, could disrupt the process necessarily, because you
Right.
have the whole team ideally working together.
Right.
But I think I think the perspective that a young person would bring to the board outweighs any concerns about whether it's disruptive or not.
Yeah, I agree. I think the board would be well served to have a broad representation, different ages. The retirees, the students, the
Yeah.
parents. That whole gamut there. I think that would be offer more insight into different mindsets.
Hmm.
Because retirees think of schools as one thing, parents see it a different way, and kids have a different take
Mhm.
on things.
Now, remind me, the petition is due today?
It is due today. They something about they have to have the deadline to get it to the town so that the select board can vote on it, and there's a whole process. I don't recall off the top of my head exactly what it is, but I know it involves there will be hearings on it. The idea is to get it to the people to vote, not just the select board. And I think that's only fair,
Mhm.
because the select board, obviously the townspeople vote them in to represent them, but maybe they don't. Townspeople don't always agree with what the select board does. So something I think this important, I think, should be taken to a townwide vote and see how it plays out.
Hmm. Now, I remember in past times when this group has brought this petition forward, or this effort forward, past boards have been concerned that because the national voting age is 18, that having a different age in local elections could bring us up against some legal issues.
Yes, yeah, that is another issue that needs to be addressed on the state level.
Hmm.
It will need to get state approval. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But I applaud their efforts. They're getting involved. I mean, bravo.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Anytime someone gets involved.
especially a young person.
Yeah.
Get them involved in the political process and in community and so forth. And they don't have that. They won't go into adulthood with apathy and I don't care. It doesn't affect me. Well, yeah, it does.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
As much as
People
you
like
it
to
doesn't.
complain, but they don't want to step up.
Isn't that an interesting
Yeah.
little quirk of human behavior?
Yes.
Mhm.
The backseat driver, the Monday morning quarterback. I step up.
Step up. Now, tell us, there's some really good news about the Brattleboro landfill.
Yes, they are doing phenomenal work. And the citizens of Brattleboro and the surrounding communities deserve a lot of the credit.
Okay.
Brattleboro also because, they really went all out to educate people on how this whole composting thing is going to work,
This
curbside
is true.
pickout.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you do curbside compost pickup in a rural area with
Mm-hmm.
critters and so forth? But it's working out, and they've surpassed, was it, I think of like 65% of the waste has been diverted from the landfill.
Wow.
It's going to recycling, whether it's material recycling or compost recycling. And, residents are buying the compost and using it locally. So it promotes better soil health,
Mm-hmm.
less waste in the landfill. And other towns around the state are looking at Brattleboro as a role model on how to do their programs. So I think that's great.
What did the folks at Chris Mays wrote the article?
Hmm.
Was there anything that, say, Bob Spencer or anyone at the solid waste district pointed to as, okay, this is where we were really successful? This is what made the difference. Was it just the outreach and
I
education?
think I think a big part of it was the outreach and education.
Okay.
You have to have the people buy into it and follow along with the rules, um, and the procedures and everything, because otherwise it just falls apart.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that education was a big part of it, and they really they had public hearings. They had information in the press, obviously, flyers, and if something wasn't done right, they didn't automatically fine people. They would educate them.
Mm-hmm.
Educate them, give them this, drop off a piece of paper, a little flyer or something. This is the proper procedure. And anything new, any change, it's going to take time to adjust.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they took the right approach and not, bringing the hammer down and just really more of an education thing from the get-go. And it's worked out well.
Yeah, trying to reinforce good behavior and good habits.
Yes, it's not easy. It's not easy. We are all creatures of habit, and it's hard to change sometimes.
Yeah. Have you had a chance to see any of the composted soil, the outcome of the composting program?
I have not. No, I live in Whitingham, so we don't get the
You don't get to see it.
I don't get to see it. We have our own compost pile at home.
Well, if anyone is curious about the Wyndham Solid Waste Management District's composting program, you can contact the office and they will give you tours. And it's some pretty nice looking soil that
Is
comes
it?
out of
I
that.
imagine it is. I
Mm-hmm.
imagine it is, yeah.
Very dark, very rich. Now, I know that the reformer will be following the youth vote
Yes, yes.
and the outcome of that petition today. Anything else on your desk that you're kind of keeping an eye on?
Well, obviously, we're gonna, follow up with the Witherby lawsuit against the police department,
Mhm.
see how that plays out. We're going to be doing some back to school stuff.
That's
People need to
right.
be careful on the roads.
Yeah.
Starting next week. Watch
Next
next week.
already.
Yes, next week. And of course, it won't be long before we start gearing up for the elections.
That's right, November.
Yeah,
Whew.
yeah. I think once we get through the back to school stuff, then we're going to start
Hmm.
really focusing on upcoming elections and so forth. It's going to be huge, I think.
Was there anything in the recent primaries that surprised you? Any outcomes?
Not necessarily. I do have to say in the governor's race, Christine Halquist, I think that surprised the whole country that a
Mhm.
transgender. But then they thought, then they heard it was from Vermont.
Like, oh, Vermont.
Yeah, right. I really hope that it doesn't take away from the issues.
Hmm.
That I hope people aren't so focused on Christine's transgender decision and just focus on the issues. Unfortunately, I mean, this happens, when there's a first woman, such and
Yes.
such. It's always because this is the first.
Hmm.
And there's so much focus on that. I really hope that we stay focused on the issues.
I think that's a really good point because there's still a lot about where Christine stands on issues
Mhm.
that we're learning.
Yes.
And a lot of what we need to know about Christine, we may not really learn until she goes toe to toe with Scott
Right.
in a number of forums
Right.
and debates. And so, yes, I agree that who she is as a potential leader and a governor um, is part of the full package.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And infinitely more important than her gender.
Hmm. One thing that surprised me in the primary was Brenda Siegel took Windham County. And yes, I realized that she was the hometown girl,
Yeah.
and so she did have really great name recognition here. But I was still really impressed that for someone who this was her first time campaigning, and first time with any kind of political office,
Yeah.
that she ran a really good campaign.
She did. She did. She really put herself out there, and she's to be commended for that. You know,
Hmm.
she stepped up and she tried.
Yes,
You know.
this is very true. And with school starting, I want to, just before we go, I want to quickly shift gears and go back to school. You said it's starting next week.
Yes.
And any changes to the upcoming school system? I know we're kind of in an interesting limbo time between Act
All right. Well.
46 and.
Oh yeah. Well, that's still playing itself out.
Okay.
There's still a lot of resistance to Act 46. There's focus groups now that are coming out against Act 46 and so forth. Vermont Digger has been really great about covering the whole Act
Yes.
46. So if go onto Vermont Digger's site for complete Act 46
Yeah,
coverage.
very in depth.
Yes.
And there's in September, there will be an agency of education will be in the area to kind of hold a public meeting. I don't remember when that is, though.
I don't remember off the top of my head. No.
Okay, we're going to.
There'll be
check
lots
our
of meetings.
calendars.
Lots of meetings.
So yes, Act 46 is not quite done yet. You can
Nope.
still weigh in
Yep.
if you have strong feelings about Act 46. Well, Melanie, great to have you on the show today.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thanks for coming in.